Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm so excited to share this episode with you because it's one that's really important to me and close to my passions and my heart. And today I want to talk about my journey with music, realizing just how much music has been important to my life. If you follow me, you know that music and singing is a very important part of who I am and what I do. And being a lead singer in a salsa band, it's my passion, it's what I love to do. But some of you may not really know about how I actually started to get into music. So I want to let you guys in to my journey and where it all started. So let's go back, and we're going to be going back to the beginning here of my musical journey to when I was about 10 or 11 years old. So when I was in about 5th or 6th grade in elementary school, I actually joined my school band, and that's kind of where my first experiences with music started, with me playing music in a sense. Before then, I do have a memory of me having experience with music when I was in elementary school, but I'll go back to that in a little bit later in this episode. So when I was in elementary school, and like I said, I ended up joining my school band, and I was playing alto saxophone, and I loved it. I loved the saxophone. I loved playing the saxophone. I just thought that the saxophone was so cool, and I just loved the color as well, gold. And I loved it. I loved playing saxophone. Of course, through being part of the band, I learned to play my instrument, learn how to read music, and read notes and stuff like that. And I just remember having a great time. It was something that I would take my saxophone with me and play every now and then in the band. I don't remember how often we would play, but oh my god, there was a bad experience I also had. A bullying experience surrounding my saxophone that maybe I'll talk about in some other episode. I had my first experience with music back then, but fortunately, things happen and life happens. I just remember being at that age, loving what I did, and my parents talking to me and telling me that I wasn't going to be able to be part of the band anymore because they couldn't afford to rent the saxophone anymore. So most schools, I think back then, I don't know if they still do that now, kind of have a stock of instruments that they can maybe lend out to kids who join the band, and the saxophone wasn't something that they had available, and so I actually ended up having to provide my own, and so my parents were renting the instrument, but they must have been going through a very hard time financially that they told me that they could no longer do that. And as a kid, you don't really get it. You just know that something's wrong and being sad about the fact that I wasn't going to be able to do what I love to do anymore. And I remember having a conversation with my band teacher, and they ended up telling me that although they didn't have any saxophones that they could lend out, if I wanted to, I could play the clarinet because they had clarinets available. And to be honest, I wasn't happy about that. I guess it wasn't exciting. It's not the saxophone, it's a clarinet. And just after playing the sax and learning that instrument and reading the music, I just felt like the saxophone was not as exciting. But I did keep playing. I stayed in the band and I learned how to play the clarinet, but I just didn't feel the same anymore. It just didn't feel as exciting, you know what I mean? And then from there, when I got into middle school, I actually started playing the tenor saxophone. And if you're not familiar with the tenor sax, it's a huge instrument, especially for a little kid like myself. It just seemed overwhelming. I just remember having to lug around this huge instrument from home to school and back and forth, and in the class playing this instrument that was so huge. But I guess I had some type of talent because I remember my teacher would have me sometimes leave the class and warm up exercises at the beginning of the class. So that was great for me. It made me feel good about myself and made me feel like I was special, or that I knew what I was doing in terms of music, that I had a talent. But then from there, my playing music didn't really last, because from that grade level in middle school, surprisingly, I never played music anymore. I just guess my family couldn't really afford any of it anymore. And I remember my dad went on a trip to Mexico, and my dad is Mexican. He's from Michoacan. And then there's this very famous town in Mexico that is known for guitar making. I think it's called Paracho or something like that. But he ended up coming back from Mexico and he brought a guitar. And I think he felt sorry for me. He probably felt that we can't afford to buy you a saxophone or rent you a saxophone anymore, but here's a guitar that you can keep expressing your love of playing music. But it just didn't excite me. I had already had the experience of once being downgraded from a sax to a clarinet, and now from going back to saxophone and going to a guitar. It was something that I didn't really care for. I had no idea how to play the guitar, and I knew nothing about music, reading music for a guitar. And obviously, guitars are not something that you can play in a band, like a school band, or at least were the band that I was in. Those are not really instruments that are included, and so it's something that I had to end up trying to figure out for myself. And I remember my parents took me to a couple lessons to a guitar or a music store, and I remember taking some guitar lessons and having a book, but it was kind of left to figure it out for yourself, teach yourself. And just I didn't like it. I didn't like the guitar. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I wanted to play the sax, and I just wasn't excited about the guitar. And then after that, I really didn't have any connection to playing music. Like I mentioned before, surprisingly, I never ended up playing music again, or a musical instrument, in the rest of middle school or even high school. And honestly, I don't even know why. I would have thought that going into high school, I would have joined the school band or something like that, but I was just so focused on school. I took my studies very seriously, and my parents wanted me to take my studies very seriously, and so I was very involved with academics and taking honor classes, AP classes, and graduating at the top of my class. That I felt like I never was doing anything fun for myself. And I wish I had, because how different would have been to actually continue to play music through all of high school in some way, even being in the band or singing or productions and plays and musicals and stuff like that. I really wish that I would have had that chance and had that experience. But I guess things just happen the way they're meant to be. And I didn't end up having any more experience in terms of music until after graduating from high school. But during all of this time that all this was happening, I did have exposure to music, not playing music, but actual music. As a kid, actually, I didn't grow up in a household that played music. I don't even remember that we owned any type of CD player or record player or cassette player or anything like that when I was very young. That didn't end up happening until I was in high school. And when I was in high school, probably when I was at a sophomore and later, that's when I remember my parents buying the first ever CD player. It was one of those big units that had, you could put 5 CDs and it would rotate. You could rotate 5 CDs and play them. And my parents ended up signing up for this membership. I'm sure some of you might remember. They used to have this membership thing through the mail. So you would sign up for a membership, and then they would send you a list of available CDs by the artist and the CD and stuff like that. And then you'd fill out the little card, mail it back, and then they send you your CD in the mail. And you got the chance to listen to it and decide whether you want to keep it or send it back. And that's how I got my exposure to contemporary music. A lot of what I first listened to was a lot of R&B. So I would listen to Mariah Carey, CNC Music Factory, Tony Braxton, Blackstreet, a lot of R&B. You would think that as a Latino I would have grown up around more music, but my first exposures to actually buying CDs was a lot of R&B music. Then later I did get into Latin music, and I got stuff like by Celia Cruz, Gloria Estefan, Selena, John Secada. And then during that time I actually started to start salsa dancing because I was exposed to salsa dancing through a party event of the church where I observed a couple dancing salsa and I just fell in love. I fell in love with the music. I fell in love with the dancing. And then from there, salsa became a huge part of my life. And it was the music, the connection, the dancing, just made me feel awesome. And that's what led me to where I'm at today, where I sing in a salsa band. But that was kind of my exposure to music. But aside from that, I did have some other experiences and exposure to music outside of playing in a band and listening to music, and that was in church, which I will be getting into next. So far I've shared my experiences with music in terms of like playing music and listening to music. But this is where we start getting into singing and my voice. So my first experiences with singing, I do have this memory back when I was in elementary school. I can see myself in my mind that I was on some type of stage performing and singing. I feel like it was like an Elvis song. And that was the only experience that I remember. Someday maybe I'll try to ask my mom about it, whether it's something that really happened or it's just something that I'm projecting in my mind. But aside from that, my first experiences with singing were actually in the church. So growing up, after 10 years, so when I was about 10 years old, I grew up in a very traditional Christian household. I guess traditional in a sense, but just Christian. Church was a major part of our lives, and we would go to church 3 times a week. I guess it's not traditional because, to be honest, a lot of people call themselves Christian but don't really go to church. But we were church goers 3 times a week, and in church, singing was a very big part of what we did, or a regular part of what we did. So every single church service was about 2 hours long, and it would begin with singing, end with singing, and somewhere in the middle of the service there was also singing. And we had songbooks. Everyone had the same songbook, and they had lyrics and musical notes and everything like that. And the music was pretty simple. They would play some accompaniment, like piano accompaniment, and the piano was playing the melodies. So it was nothing flashy or anything like that, because the most important thing was not the singing, but the message. It wasn't about the performance. It was about the lyrics that were being sung and the gospel and things like that. So it's something I really love to do. I love to sing in church, and those were very important and special moments to me. There was many moments where I even have a couple of where really like the setting and the song that was being sung and the moment were led me to tears. But outside of church, there wasn't really much singing at home. Again, my family wasn't really much of a musical family. It's not like I had anyone in my family who sang or played music or anything like that. And so anytime if you remember, I was talking about how my first exposure to actually listening to music was through the CD subscription service. So I was being exposed to a lot of music that was not related to religion or anything like that. And obviously much more complicated musical compositions and singers and vocal ranges and stuff like that. And so I'd play music and I'd sing around the house, but my family they didn't like my voice. They didn't like my singing. I remember growing up and a lot of times being told by my mom and my brothers to just shut up, that you sound horrible. And I never felt encouraged by my family in terms of my love of singing. And also you have to think about this, because so much of my singing was in the church. Sometimes very conservative churches, when people try to do things outside of the church, they see it as a way that you're trying to draw attention to yourself. And they see pursuing music as a way to lead you away from God. So they weren't that encouraging to me in regards to my love of singing. And again, they would often tell me just to shut up, and it hurt. It made me feel like I was horrible. And I think that's why I was so shy about singing in public for so long because I just never had any type of support or encouragement when it came to my voice. And it really did take me a very long time to be able to build any type of confidence. But one of the ways that I was able to build that confidence was after high school. I ended up becoming, in my early 20s, a close friend with someone who lived in Mexico, and he was a singer and a composer, an author. So he would write a lot of his own music. And I often would go to Mexico, Tijuana, Mexico, to visit him and hang out and stuff like that. And he was super passionate about music. And so he would go to a recording studio to lay tracks and to put together a CD of the music and his compositions, since he was a singer-songwriter. And I would go along and I'd just sit there and watch. And it was just like, oh, but inside of me was this burning desire to, that's what I want to be doing. I can play an instrument, I can sing, or I thought I could sing. And then eventually I did have the courage to say, well, do you think I can record a song? Can I go in the singing booth and do something? And then that ended up becoming what I did. I did end up building my confidence because, again, back then I really have no confidence at all. I had gotten this message from my family that I wasn't good, and to be honest, I wasn't. I wasn't born with this amazing voice or vocal cords or talent or anything like that. So listen back to things from myself back then, I know I wasn't that great. I was bad. But because I had gotten so many of those negative reinforcements, I did feel not confident. And the only way I felt comfortable with actually singing was in a recording studio, because it was a safe space. I felt like, well, there's no one here to criticize me, to observe me, because the only person that's here is me, a friend that supports me, and a studio engineer that's just, their job is just to record me. And he was a good guy too. He was like a jackass or a jerk about things. And so often I would go to Tijuana, and every visit that I would go over there, I was like, when are we going to the studio? What song am I recording now? What I'm going to work on now? And it's just through that experience that I was able to gain some confidence and develop my voice, that eventually I felt like, oh, now I feel comfortable and I think I'm okay, so let me go ahead and do this out in public. And that's where I ended up discovering, my love of karaoke. And that was a turning point for me for sure, because it was the first time I actually started to sing in public. And I was surprised to not be confronted by people who were there to criticize me or tell me that I was horrible. And instead, I found that people, if anyone would approach going to karaoke, if a lot of these times I was going to karaoke by myself, and if anyone would end up coming up to me at some point at the karaoke bar, it was to tell me, hey, I love that song, or you sounded great, or do you know this song? Can you sing that song? And it's those kind of moments that really started to build my confidence, because I wasn't getting people coming up to me and say, hey, why you sing that song, or you sound horrible, or whatever the case may be. I just found people were at a karaoke bar to have a good time, to just let loose. And the fact that I was being met by people who found my voice bearable or even likable was something that was starting to build my confidence. So I regularly started going out to karaoke bars and with just doing it a lot, like singing often. I just trying to build my confidence, and I really started to find my voice through going to karaoke. And then at some point I started thinking, well, hey, maybe I'm not so bad, maybe I am improving, maybe people do enjoy what I like to do. And so I started training, vocal training. I would go out to, that was a process, trying to find a vocal teacher who was knowledgeable, who supported me, who understood what my needs were. That was difficult. And that was very much a challenging thing. I had some good vocal teachers. I had some great vocal teachers, and I had some very bad vocal teachers. But once I ended up finding someone that I actually liked and that I felt like I was making progress, I did study voice for a couple of years, so I would very often, at least once a month or twice a month, go to a vocal teacher and just learn how to use my voice more and more. And eventually, once I started feeling even more confident, I ended up trying out for my first vocal talent or showcase. And that is what ended up leading me to Mambo Son, formerly known as Mambop. And I think I'll leave that story for now. I'll leave it here. So I'll go back into that story in the next episode. But I hope that you all have enjoyed my story today. I've definitely shared my musical background from playing the sax to finding my voice, my experiences with singing in church, karaoke, a studio, recording studio, and that led me next to becoming a salsa singer. All of this has been just filled with ups and downs, like any journey. And I think that music really has taught me that there is life in expressing yourself and your passion and connecting with other people and just finding joy. Because so many times when I am not feeling the best, I always turn to music, whether it's listening to a piece of music or actually putting on a karaoke track and belting it out or meeting up for a rehearsal with my band. Music has power, and I would just say to anyone that maybe you feel like music is your passion and you want to play music or sing, just don't give up. There's always going to be people who will discourage you and won't see the potential in you, but if this is really your passion and what you love to do, just continue doing it. But anyways, thank you everyone for listening and for letting me share. If there's any questions you might have, please feel free to let me know. I'll see if I can answer any of them. But until next time, I hope that you take care and take care of yourself and one another. And always, until next time.